Okay, hello everybody. I am Diana Lindsay, President of Sunbelt Publications, and I'd like to welcome you to another Sunbelt Spotlight. Today we have a very special guest. We have Dawn Harrison, who is the author of one of our books, which is the Louis Rose, the San Diego Jewish settler and entrepreneur, if you can all see it there. And this is a delight to have Dawn on here because, he's a very special person. He's also the editor-in-chief of the Jewish Press Heritage, and he's also a freelance writer and author of several other books, and he used to be a political writer for the San Diego Union. But, there's a special relationship with Dawn that both Lowell and I have with him, which we never discovered until we had published his book. And Dawn and I had lunch one day, and I asked him the question, and I said, how did you start writing books? How did you get into it? And he said, well, actually, I was at UCLA, and I wanted to write for the Daily Bruin. And I went in there, and they said, well, you're going to have to show us how you can write and maybe do an article. And so he said, well, I did this article about this guy who was a Bruin mountaineer who did this adventure, and he went up to Seattle and went through Canada. And my jaw just dropped at that point. And I said, and his name was Lowell Lindsay. And he looked at me and he said, it was just a surprise. And guess what? This is Dawn's article from October 10, 1962. And that was the article he wrote. You'll see his name right there, Dawn Harrison. That was the article he had to write for the Daily Bruin to show he could write. And then from there, everything is history. And it's the rest of the story because he went on to become a really great writer, a great researcher. But that's where the start came. And we didn't know we had this connection until we had published this book. So without further ado, I would love to be able to present Dawn, and we can find a little bit about Jewish high holidays in San Diego, and I'm very excited to learn about this. Hey, welcome aboard, Dawn.
Thanks so much, Diana. And imagine that was 43 years between the time I wrote that article and the time that you published my book and found out that we had that connection. And I remember how we were just both so amazed that the wheel of karma had somehow turned. At any rate, you've asked me to talk a little bit about the pioneer experience, Jewish pioneers in San Diego with the high holidays, the Jewish high holidays. And we are in the period of the Jewish high holidays now, sometimes referred to as the 10 days of awe. We recently had last Friday and Saturday, Sunday, we had Rosh Hashanah, which means the new year. Rosh is head, Shoshana is the year. And upcoming this weekend is Yom Kippur, and between the two holidays are 10 days. And there's a Jewish belief that on Rosh Hashanah, your fate is written. On Yom Kippur, it is sealed, and that however, the severe decree can be mitigated if you sincerely repent, make right with the world, try to do better, to follow God's commands, and so forth. So it's a very solemn 10 days. And back in the 1850s and the 1860s, in San Diego's pioneer period, it was one of the few holidays that people were able to get together and observe. From 1850, when Louis Rose, the first Jew in San Diego, arrived, until 1889, there was no formal synagogue. So people met either at each other's homes or they rented a hall to hold these ceremonies. And I thought today I would talk about 4 occasions of high holiday observances. And then if there are any questions, or if you have anything you'd like to add, maybe we could do it that way. But the first one was in 1851, and Louis Franklin, who was another Jew who arrived a year after Louis Rose, decided to host a high holy day get-together at his home. Now, Franklin was fairly well known up in San Francisco because in 1849 he had hosted the first High Holy Day services in San Francisco in a big tent, which were pretty well attended. And the following year, at the High Holy Day services of 1850 up there, he actually was the speaker, gave the sermon. Although he was a layman, he was very knowledgeable about Judaism. Uh, but the following year, he moved down to San Diego, and wanting to keep up his tradition, he invited what Jews were in San Diego to come to his home and to celebrate Rosh Hashanah. And the San Diego Herald, which was publishing once a week, noted that there were only 3 Jews there, Franklin, uh, Jacob Marks, and a fellow by the name of Charles Fletcher. Well, where was Lewis Rose? The paper said those were the only 3 Hebrews in town. And so it gave rise to the question, well, was Lewis Rose not in town, or was he not Jewish? The answer, of course, was that he wasn't in town because he definitely was Jewish. I traced his life and actually traveled from Germany, where he was raised, to New Orleans, where he came to this country, found his ketubah, that's a Jewish wedding certificate in New Orleans. He later, in San Diego, officiated at Jewish ceremonies, actually donated to the Jewish community its first cemetery. So he was very much Jewish. So the fact that he wasn't there must have meant that either he was out of town, or he realized that it couldn't be an official service with only 3 people. You need 10 in Jewish community life to make a minyan, to hold formal community prayers. You can pray by yourself, of course, but if you want it to be a communal service, you need at least 10 people. So that was the first one. And then I'd like to move on to 1859 for something that became known as the San Diego Incident. And it's really one of the more remarkable stories of Jewish observance in San Diego. It happened that while the High Holy Day services were being held at the Franklin Hotel, which was 2 doors away from the courthouse in Old Town, the grand jury was meeting at the courthouse, and the Jews of San Diego, of whom there were only 10, just a minyan, were holding a service. And during the grand jury hearing, they were inquiring into a routine assault case. And it was asked, was there anybody there was there anyone who witnessed this assault? And someone said, yes, Moses Manasseh saw it. And someone said, well, where's Moses? Now, this was a question Israelites had asked, way back in the days of crossing the Sinai. Where's Moses? But in this case, they were able to say, well, Moses is at that Jewish meeting at the Franklin House. So they said, well, go get him. And Deputy Sheriff Joseph Reiner went over 2 doors to the hotel, and went up the stairs into the meeting room, and he says, Moses, we need you. And he says, oh, well, I can't go because this is an important service that we're having, and it's the holiest day of our year. And if I leave, everybody has to stop. And so I'll come testify on some other day, but not today. So the sheriff went back to the grand jury, and they says, well, he refuses to come. And they said, well, arrest him or bring him over by force if you have to. So again, he goes back and he says, you've got to come with me, Moses. And he tries to take him there. And the other Jews in the service intervened and stopped him from trying to take Moses. And he goes back, Reiner goes back again, and he says, I'm sorry, they wouldn't let me take him. And so the grand jury says, well, let's form a posse. So now a bunch of men come over, and you can just see them coming out of the courthouse, walking 2 buildings over, going up the stairs, and they go to Moses, and they kind of lift him by his arms, and they march him downstairs and over to the courthouse, and they sit him in the witness chair. And they said, Moses, tell us about the assault that you witnessed. And Moses crosses his arms over his chest and he refuses to say a word. And the reason he won't say a word is because the holiday is still going on. And he sits there quietly until the sun goes down, when the Yom Kippur is over. And then he gives his testimony. Well, the story didn't end there. Louis Franklin was incensed by this intrusion upon Jewish religious practice and wrote to every Jewish newspaper in the country, Cincinnati, San Francisco, and all sorts of other places, describing the incident as really one of the most terrible things that ever happened to Jews since the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed in the year 70. His exact quote was, quote, "The wrong of the nature I shall here recount to you knows no parallel in the annals of the civilized world. An offense has been committed against all decency, and I, in common with my co-religionists, call upon you to give publicity to the matter so that the perpetrators may be marked with a rebuke of scorn by a free and independent press." Well, the reporting prompted people to start debating the issue. Should Moses have simply gone and given his testimony and then gone back to the services and let it resume? Or was he correct in resisting and saying this is an infringement on religious liberty and insisting that the grand jury hearing be held on another date? That was a Saturday, by the way, and he said, look, I could come back on Monday. And the opinion was divided. I mean, some Jews said, yeah, Moses did exactly the right thing. You know, this is supposed to be a country where we're free to practice our religion and we shouldn't be interfered with. And others said, he should have just taken a break. He could have gone out for a cigarette or something and given his testimony, and then he could have gone back. But at least among the Jewish population, the overwhelming majority felt that Moses did the right thing and it struck a blow for religious freedom. Interestingly enough, Moses Manasseh is remembered as the man who brought the first Torah to San Diego. Not only was he essential for the service, but the Torah that he brought was obviously quite necessary as well. Well, the third high holiday observance I'd like to talk about, occurred in 1871. And this actually occurred in Rose's home, which today is known as the Robinson Rose Building or the Visitor Center at Old Town, San Diego State Historic Park. And it was at that particular high holy day services that the Jews of San Diego decided that they needed to strengthen the Hebrew Benevolent Society that would help other Jews in their times of distress. And so it was agreed that they would have another meeting in a few days to discuss just what they should do and how they could set up this benevolent society. And at that meeting, Marcus Schiller became the president of that society. Now, the name of Marcus Schiller is pretty well known in local Jewish history because he became the president not only of the traveling congregation, you might call it a Da'at Yeshurun, which was what the Jews who were meeting in each other's homes called themselves, but later on of Congregation Beth Israel, which was and continues to be the oldest congregation in San Diego. So he served as president, and Joseph Manasseh, who was a cousin of Moses and who was a partner of Schiller's, was also on the board. And they decided that the Benevolent Society would follow the bylaws that had been adopted in Los Angeles by Congregation B'nai B'rith, which later became known as the Wilshire Boulevard Temple in Los Angeles. And so that was an important meeting for the Jewish community. And then my final story or anecdote concerns 1889. That was 1 year, by the way, after Lewis Rose died. And by this time, San Diego had moved, most of the people of San Diego had moved from Old Town to New Town of Alonzo Horton. And they decided to build a synagogue at the corner of 2nd and Beach Streets. And they inaugurated that synagogue on Rosh Hashanah of that year. And it was a great ceremony with all sorts of people attending, not only the Jews, but the leaders of the community, to celebrate Jewish life in San Diego. And the reason that it took so many years before a synagogue was established was because San Diego was having ups and downs when it came to its economy. The leaders of the city had hoped that San Diego would become the transcontinental terminus of the railroad, and that at our wonderful bay, there would be a depot in which cargo ships would unload their goods, and they would be put on the railroad to go across the country. And every time that it seemed like this would happen, our population would grow. And when it seemed like it wouldn't happen, our population would decline. And this was also true of the Jewish community. And about 1885, San Diego didn't become the hub of a transcontinental railroad, but became a spur of a transcontinental railroad that ended actually in Los Angeles. And people were optimistic enough that they felt that at least San Diego now had a future as a city, that it wasn't just in the cul-de-sac of California. And so at that point, the synagogue was built. And today that synagogue can be seen at Heritage Park near Old Town, just about 2 blocks from it, where it was moved by the Save Our Heritage organization as an example of the architecture of the day. And it's a beautiful place to visit. Sometimes services are actually held there by small congregations, but it's open to the general public. And so with that, I think I'll conclude. There's 4 stories of early high holiday observances in Pioneer San Diego, and I'll check back to you, Diana.
I had a question for Dawn. If in those early years there were only about 10 Jews in San Diego and time has gone on, do you have an estimate of how many Jews now live in San Diego?
Yes. The last time that there was any kind of a census done, the community was about 120,000, of which 80,000 were, you might say, Jews themselves, and another 40,000 were non-Jews who were nice enough to marry us. You know, that there was there has been a great deal of intermarriage in our community. Some of those folks have converted to Judaism, others have kept their original religions, but they're considered part of the community, whichever way they go. So about 120,000 out of what is it, 3.5 million that we have in the county, you know.
And proportionately from the early population of San Diego, proportionally now, has the proportion changed? Is it more or less?
Yeah, early on, at one point, at the very beginning of San Diego, the Jewish population might have been at almost as high as 10%, with all the merchants that came who were Jewish, looking for opportunities. But then it shrunk, and you can do the math. 3.5 million divided into 120,000 is a fairly tiny percentage.
Small percentage. And then the other question I had, or not, actually it's more of a statement. As you were talking, I was kind of looking at the index of your book, and all of those folks that you talked about are in your book. So if folks would like to know more about Moses or Marcus or Joseph, they can find more in the book. And I believe, Rebecca, that this book is now discounted for the talk that we're having. So if you haven't read this book, It's well written. It'll give you the full history of the Jews in San Diego. So, please come visit Sunbelt or order online and take advantage of the discount.
One of the things that I should point out is that when I set out to write it, I had noticed that there were many histories of San Diego that barely mentioned the Jews, and there were some histories of the Jews that barely mentioned the civic developments of San Diego. And I realized that since Louis Rose was a man who had been involved in both the Jewish community and in the development of the city of San Diego, I could tell the history of San Diego through his eyes. Because in addition to being an active member of the Jewish community, Louis Rose served on the city board of trustees, on the First County Board of Supervisors. He was on the Board of Education. He laid out the area of Point Loma that we know today as Roseville. And he also had named after him the place where he had his first tannery, and that was Rose Canyon. Not named for a flower, but actually named for Louis Rose. So in telling the story of the development of San Diego and of the Jewish community, the book made, I believe, a unique contribution to the literature of both.
And how did you first get interested in Louis Rose, or how did you hear about him?
Interestingly enough, I had a public relations agency and served as the agency served as the director of the San Diego Cruise Ship Consortium. And through the Cruise Ship Consortium, I attended various conferences and was asked if we would also take on a client, the Old Town Trolley Tours of San Diego. And I became part owner of that and the first general manager, and wrote the first tour of Old Town, actually not of Old Town, but of the whole city. But it was, started in Old Town and went all around San Diego and came back. Those are the orange and green trolleys that you see around town. They're buses, but they look like trolleys. And in writing the first script, I kept running across the name of Louis Rose, and he kept popping up in these various places. And I got intrigued, and I said, I'd like to find out more about this guy. And then that led me on a quest to go to the various archives all over town, and I found that he was indeed a very fascinating guy, and I was hooked and wrote the book.
That's great. Does he have any really living relatives here in San Diego now?
No, he had a daughter who survived to her 80s, but she was never married. Her name was Henrietta Rose, and she was a teacher at Roosevelt Junior High School. She taught Spanish and also handwriting. She also had served as the president in 1901 of the Eastern Star, which is a Masonic organization for women. And Louis also had been a member of the Masons here, of the first Masonic Free and Masons. I think it was Lodge number 35. And so she continued in that tradition, but she never married. And so when she died, so did his line. People ask, was he any relation to Rose Toyota? And no, he's not.
And so are there any like cousins or any other relatives? No, so the whole line is.
He had a nephew up in San Francisco, but to my knowledge, there is no member of that line still alive.
Well, it's a fascinating story, and you're such a great writer, and you're so charming when you speak, and so I'm just delighted to hear your stories and anecdotes. I don't know, any of the folks here, you have questions you'd like to ask Dawn? I think a couple people said they had read Dawn's book. There was somebody had put their name in the chat that they had read it. I don't know if you have
I'm reading it right now.
Oh, you're reading it now? Okay.
Yeah, I am reading it right now, and they're just to El Paso, so I have a long way to go. But it's been awesome to listen to you talk about this, and it seems like the Jewish population is so underrepresented here in San Diego. I mean, how small? I mean, I find that shocking that there's such a small population here.
Well, actually, it is a small population, but it's been really from the beginning very politically and civically active. And there's a long list of office holders and potential office holders who are members of the Jewish community. Just to give you an example, currently on the ballot, there are 3 Jewish women who are running for major offices. Barbara Bree, the city councilman, she's running for mayor, as you know. Sarah Jacobs is running for Congress, and Tara Lawson Reamer is running for the County Board of Supervisors, and that's just 3 of them. If you go back over recent San Diego history, Bill Collender, who was the sheriff, was a member of the Jewish community. Bonnie Dumanis, who was the district attorney, also was a member of the Jewish community. Lynn Schenk, who was our congresswoman back then, and Susan Davis, who is our congresswoman today, also members of the Jewish community, and the list goes on. And there has been that kind of activism really since the 1850s when Louis Rose first arrived.
That's impressive. I didn't realize that all those people were from the Jewish community. I knew about Sarah Jacobs, but I didn't realize the other ones.
Yeah, well, of course, people know Sarah's grandfather, Irwin Jacobs, who was the co-founder of Qualcomm. And so I guess she's very, very well known as a result.
That's
How many
interesting.
synagogues are there in town?
Well, if you count all the Chabad houses, there's over 30 of them throughout the county. You have the 4 major streams of Judaism: Orthodox, Conservative, Reconstructionist, and Reform. And we have some of each. And then within the Orthodox movement, you have the Hasidim, that is the Chabad houses, and you also have what we call the modern Orthodox. And we have really a good representation everywhere. But if you wanted to, you could divide the county into 6 regions, and in each region, you have several Jewish institutions. There's the border in South Bay is one, downtown Kearny Mesa, North Park, etc. That would be 2. The College del Cerro, San Carlos area is 3. The La Jolla is 4. North County Coastal is 5, and North County Inland is 6. And in all of those areas, you have clusters of Jewish institutions, both of the of synagogues and also of Jewish organizations, such as Jewish Family Service or the Lawrence Family Jewish Community Center or Seacrest Village Retirement Home. So in each of these places, you can find evidence of rich Jewish life. Rich, and by rich, I mean not particularly money, but rich in terms of many activities and devotion.
Well, I saw somebody had a question, Samantha.
Were the conversos in the New World in San Diego, or was that only in South America and Spain?
Okay, well, let me first thank you for the question, Samantha. Conversos were the people who were originally Jewish, and then under the force of the Inquisition were required to convert to Christianity. Some of whom only did so outwardly, but continued to practice their Judaism inwardly, privately in their homes. And when they were caught doing that, they were burned at the stake. There was a great deal of converso settlement in New Mexico. And today you'll find cemeteries in which you'll find Jewish, like the Star of David on some of the old gravestones. But in San Diego, we didn't have too many from that era. although we do have a very fascinating situation in Tijuana. You have a great deal of Christians who have converted to Judaism in Mexico and are members of the Congregación Hebrea de Baja California. And the fellow who is the rabbi there tells me that many of them would come to him and say, you know, our family for generations has always lit candles on Friday nights, but we don't know why. And that we would always, you know, clean the house. And then basically what happened is that they would continue with some of the Jewish customs of preparing for the Sabbath and lighting the candles for the Sabbath, but didn't know the exact reason why they did it. And when they would find out that perhaps they were indeed descended from Jewish families that had been forced to convert, some of them decided that they wanted to convert back. And so the rabbi there would teach them about Judaism and then bring them up to Los Angeles to the American Jewish University up there on Mulholland Drive in LA. And they would meet with the Beth Din, and they would convert back. They would answer the questions and then go to mikveh, which is like a ritual bath. And when they would emerge from the mikveh, they would be Jews. So you might say that there's a very large population of conversos in Tijuana today, some of whom have moved up to San Diego, but not in the pioneer days in San Diego.
Maybe one final question, since Ruth Bader Ginsburg is lying in state. How is the community reacting to that? Do you have any feel for that?
Yeah, it's a great deal of shock. She was widely admired, and at many, she died on the day of Erev Rosh Hashanah. So Friday night, when people gathered in the synagogues, I think practically every synagogue made mention of her death and included her in their memorial prayers throughout the Rosh Hashanah holiday. And I'm sure we're going to hear more of them during Yom Kippur. Interestingly enough, some people asked, and we in fact just posted a story on our website, and if I can plug it, it's San Diego Jewish World, is sdjewishworld.com. Some people asked whether or not her lying in state violated Jewish law, which is called halacha, because it's our custom that when a person dies, we bury them almost right away, like the next day. We try not to have long waiting periods between birth and, between death and burial. And so here she's lying in state, so people were saying, well, this isn't exactly our custom, is it okay? And the answer is yes, it's perfectly okay. That it's not a matter of law that we bury them quickly, it's rather a matter of custom. And there have been times, even in the Bible, where there have been long delays between death and burial. For example, Jacob, the patriarch Jacob, died in Egypt and was brought all the way back to Canaan, to Israel, for his burial, and that took a long time before that happened. So the rabbi who wrote for us said, "Don't worry, it's all kosher."
That's great. Well, we just want one more time encourage people to take a look at Don's book and experience his great writing and all the neat stories he has about the Jewish community in San Diego. And Don, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the Sunbelt Spotlight. We thoroughly enjoyed it, and we'll be posting this. So those that, if you have other people that you think might be interested, tell them to come back to the Sunbelt website, because this will be posted on YouTube and you'll be able to see it in the future.
Wonderful. Well, we'll link to it on San Diego Jewish World as well.
Great. That's perfect. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I really enjoyed it.